In 1966, Koufax led all of baseball in wins. He struck out more batters than anyone in the National League. He claimed his third unanimous Cy Young Award, a feat no pitcher in history had ever managed even once before him. 17 days later, he retired. 30 years old, he would never throw another competitive pitch again. But here is the part almost nobody remembers. 6 years earlier, scouts inside his own organization had nearly given up on him. They called him the wildest arm in baseball. Some doubted he would ever last a full season, let alone become the greatest pitcher of his generation. Koufax arrived in Brooklyn in December of 1935. His parents divorced before he turned 4, and for years he lived mostly with his grandparents while his mother worked as an accountant to keep the family afloat. Baseball was never his first love. At Lafayette High School in Brooklyn, he was the basketball captain, a ferocious rebounder who could dunk before most teenagers his size could even touch the rim. He barely pitched a game until he was 15 years old. Basketball is what took him to the University of Cincinnati on a full scholarship with plans to study architecture. Pitching was something he agreed to try almost as a favor because the college baseball team had run desperately short on arms. He threw harder than any catcher on that team had ever tried to handle, and wilder too. In a single college season, he struck out 51 batters in only 31 innings, a ratio that made professional scouts sit up and start making calls. In 1954, at only 18 years old, Koufax finally signed with the Dodgers for a signing bonus and a modest starting salary. Because of the bonus rules of that era, any team that paid a young player above a certain threshold was legally required to keep him on the major league roster immediately, rather than letting him develop quietly in the minor leagues. Koufax made his major league debut in June of 1955. In his second career start, he struck out 14 batters. For 6 full seasons, from 1955 through 1960, Koufax was, by the numbers, one of the least reliable pitchers in baseball. 36 wins, 40 losses, an earned run average hovering above 4. He walked more than 400 batters in that stretch, nearly 1 for every 2 innings he threw. Catchers dreaded warming him up. Managers hesitated to hand him the ball in a close game because nobody, including Koufax himself, ever knew exactly where the next pitch might end up. There was another layer to his struggle that rarely makes the highlight reels. As one of the only Jewish players in the major leagues at the time, he faced open prejudice sometimes from opposing dugouts and, according to those close to him, even inside his own clubhouse. He never spoke about it publicly in those years. He simply carried it quietly, the way he carried most things. By the end of the 1960 season, Koufax seriously considered walking away from baseball for good. He was 24 years old, with a losing record and a growing reputation as an expensive experiment that had failed to pay off. Friends later said he genuinely believed his career might be over before it had ever truly started. The turning point did not happen on a mound. It happened on a bus. Spring training, 1961. Koufax and backup catcher Norm Sherry were riding to an exhibition game in Orlando, talking about pitching, about mechanics, about the frustration of never quite finding a rhythm. Later that same day, Koufax walked the first 3 batters he faced, with the bases suddenly loaded and nobody out. Sherry jogged out to the mound and offered advice that sounded almost too simple to matter. Stop trying to throw every pitch harder than the last one. Ease off. Let the batter actually hit the ball. Koufax tried it. What happened next stunned them both. He got the very next 3 batters out in order. As he backed off his effort, the ball somehow moved faster. His control sharpened almost overnight. His curveball, once erratic and unpredictable, suddenly had a life of its own. Koufax later explained it this way: the real change was never about controlling the baseball, it was about controlling himself. The results were almost immediate. In 1961, he finished 18-13, leading the National League with 269 strikeouts, a new league record, and earned his first trip to the All-Star game. The pitcher nobody wanted to catch had just become the pitcher nobody wanted to face. 2 years later, in 1963, the transformation was complete. Koufax won 25 games against only 5 losses, posted a microscopic earned run average of 1.88, and threw 11 shutouts, a record for a left-hander that still stands today. He swept both the Cy Young Award unanimously and the National League Most Valuable Player Award in the same season. Then he dismantled the mighty New York Yankees in the World Series, striking out the first 5 batters he faced in Game 1, Mickey Mantle included, not once but twice, on his way to a 4-game sweep. Hall of Famer Yogi Berra, who caught more great pitchers than almost anyone alive, admitted afterward that he understood exactly how a man could win 25 games that season. What genuinely puzzled him was how that same man had somehow managed to lose 5. Just as the legend was being written, his own body tried to end it. Early in 1962, Koufax made a quiet but calculated decision. He began batting left-handed instead of right-handed, reasoning that if a pitch ever struck him, he would rather it hit his throwing arm's opposite side. It was meant to protect his career. Instead, it very nearly ended it. A pitch caught his left index finger, the very finger that snapped off his devastating curveball. He said nothing to the training staff at first, hoping it would simply heal on its own. Over the following weeks, the finger slowly turned pale, then numb. By July, doctors were seriously discussing the possibility that he might lose it entirely. The diagnosis was a rare circulatory disorder triggered by a blood clot deep in his palm, quietly cutting off the flow of blood to the finger that made his career possible. And yet, in the middle of all this, on the 30th of June, Koufax threw the first no-hitter of his career against the New York Mets, pitching through a hand that was already beginning to fail him. He was, at that moment, leading the entire league in earned run average. He was eventually sidelined for 9 full weeks. The Dodgers lost a tense pennant race without him. Reflecting on that long winter, not knowing whether his career or even his finger would ultimately survive, Koufax later admitted that some nights out on the mound, he simply felt alone, scared, and naked. Here is what makes this moment essential to his story. Greatness, for Koufax, was never guaranteed or permanent. It was always one pitch away from disappearing completely. That fragility is exactly what makes what came next so extraordinary. By 1965, the finger had fully healed. What followed was unlike anything baseball had ever witnessed. Koufax threw a no-hitter in 4 consecutive seasons, a feat no pitcher in history had ever accomplished before him. The 4th of those came on the 9th of September, 1965, against the Chicago Cubs at Dodger Stadium. It was not just a no-hitter, it was perfect. 27 batters faced, 27 retired, not a single one reached base. The tension built quietly for hours, inning by inning, in front of a modest, hushed crowd that sensed something rare was happening. By the late innings, Koufax was somehow throwing harder than he had all night, striking out the final 6 batters he faced in a row, for 14 strikeouts total, the most ever recorded in a perfect game up to that point. On the opposing mound, in almost total obscurity, a rookie named Bob Hendley pitched one of the finest games of his own career and still lost, 1-0, a forgotten masterpiece buried beneath someone else's perfection. The entire contest lasted barely more than an hour and a half, close to 100 pitches thrown with almost nothing wasted. Afterward, in typically understated fashion, Koufax told reporters he simply had a real good fastball that night and that it helped his curve. One newspaper writer, watching from the press box, compared the performance to the work of a great painter, a masterpiece produced almost effortlessly at the exact moment history demanded it. The broadcast call of the final strikeout has been replayed by baseball fans for 6 decades, one of the most recognized moments in the sport's entire history. He finished that season with 382 strikeouts, a modern-era record that stood for 8 more years. He won the pitching Triple Crown, leading the league in wins, earned run average, and strikeouts for the 2nd time in 3 seasons. Game 1 of the 1965 World Series fell on the 6th of October. It was also Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. Koufax, the Dodgers' best pitcher and the presumptive starter for the biggest game of the year, chose not to take the mound. He was not the first Jewish athlete to face this exact dilemma. Decades earlier, a slugger named Hank Greenberg had wrestled with the very same question during a pennant race, and another player had faced it during a World Series of his own in the 1950s. But none of those earlier moments carried the weight of a Game 1 start on the sport's biggest stage, and none would be remembered nearly as widely as what Koufax chose to do. Teammate Don Drysdale started in his place and was pulled before the 3rd inning, having already allowed 7 runs. Walking off the field, Drysdale reportedly turned to his manager and joked that he bet the skipper wished he were Jewish too. The team's owner backed Koufax's decision without a moment of hesitation, publicly declaring he would never allow his ace to pitch on that day under any circumstances whatsoever. Koufax later wrote in his own memoir that there had never really been any decision to make at all. The Dodgers lost that opening game. Koufax returned the very next day, pitched well, and still lost. It would have been easy for the story to end there, a noble gesture followed by a quiet, forgettable defeat. Instead, Koufax threw complete game shutouts in both Game 5 and the decisive Game 7, the latter on only 2 days of rest, clinching the championship and earning World Series Most Valuable Player honors for the second time in 3 years. Koufax's answer became one of the defining moments in American sports history, a single quiet afternoon that turned a great athlete into a lasting symbol for an entire community. Decades later, the Los Angeles Dodgers placed a statue of him beside his former teammate, Jackie Robinson, at the entrance of their home stadium. Standing at the unveiling, Koufax said that sharing that space with Robinson would once have been unimaginable, and somehow it still felt that way. Two men, a generation apart, who each stood for something larger than the game itself. 1966 should have been a celebration. Instead, it quietly became a countdown. That spring, doctors warned Koufax that his elbow might not survive another full season of pitching. He pitched anyway and delivered the finest statistical year of his entire career. 27 wins, an earned run average of 1.73, and 317 strikeouts. He became the first pitcher in history to win 3 unanimous Cy Young awards. But the numbers hid a brutal truth. The team physician later admitted that Koufax pitched through extreme pain that could only be overcome by sheer force of will. His pitching arm had physically shortened from the accumulated damage. Simple, everyday tasks like combing his hair or shaving became small ordeals. He had to lean over the sink just to reach his own face. Before nearly every start, he soaked the arm, iced it, and endured a private routine of treatment that fans in the stands never saw. Even before that final season began, Koufax and Drysdale staged a joint 32-day holdout together, demanding a shared, multi-year contract worth far more than either had ever been offered individually, rather than negotiating separately the way every player before them had always done. The two men hired a single representative and refused to speak to the front office except through him. Team management resisted fiercely, and newspapers followed the standoff daily. When it finally ended, both pitchers received substantial raises, becoming 2 of the highest-paid players in the sport, though well short of what they had originally asked for. It was an almost unheard-of act of solidarity between 2 rivals competing for the very same paycheck, and it quietly reshaped how future players would eventually learn to fight for their worth as a group rather than alone. Koufax made his final regular season start on the very last day of that year, on only 2 days of rest, in a game the Dodgers absolutely needed to win to reach the playoffs at all. He won it. On the 18th of November, 1966, only 17 days after becoming the first 3-time unanimous Cy Young winner in history, Koufax stunned the entire sport by announcing his retirement. He was 30 years old. There was no dramatic injury caught on camera, no headline-grabbing collapse in front of a stunned stadium. There was only a quiet, deeply rational fear that if he kept pitching, he might permanently lose the use of his own arm. Surgical repair for his kind of injury simply did not exist yet. That operation would not be invented for another 8 years. Koufax later explained that in his era, doctors believed surgery would only make things worse and end a career anyway. Today, he said, you would simply have it repaired and be back on the mound the following spring. He walked away from baseball at the exact moment the entire sport assumed he still had a full decade left to give. Now you know the rest. The scouts who doubted him. 6 long years lost to wildness and self-doubt. A finger that nearly did not survive 1962. A single quiet afternoon of faith that mattered more to him than a championship game. And finally, a body that gave absolutely everything it had, right up until the moment its owner chose to stop asking it for more. The twist the title promised is not really a twist at all. It is simply this. The scouts who laughed were not wrong about the raw, uncontrolled talent they saw in a teenager who could barely find the strike zone. They were only wrong about what that talent would eventually become once its owner learned that greatness sometimes requires less force, not more, and that knowing exactly when to walk away can be its own quiet form of courage. Koufax retired at the absolute height of his powers instead of chasing one more record, one more contract, or one more headline. In a sport obsessed with numbers, he chose to protect something numbers could never measure. So here's the real question worth leaving you with. If you had reached the very top of your field, and you knew continuing might cost you everything else, would you have the courage to walk away too? Tell us honestly in the comments below. If this story moved you, give it a like so more people can find it. Share it with someone who loves baseball history, or with someone who simply needs a reminder that walking away at the right moment can be its own kind of victory. And if you want another forgotten story of greatness and sacrifice, our video on the untold story of Roberto Clemente is waiting for you right after this one.